I have a few points that I want to go over for communists to consider. They are important so much as they outline what I feel are general problems and oversights by all existing communist groups and their Marxist variants. I won't critique any particular group, but suffice to say they are pretty guilty in making common missteps in forming strategies, organizing, and assessing our true enemy at the present date. Point 1. To put an end to poverty, we must put an end to labor. So, the reason I say this, and not exploitation, is because labor is a self-mediating activity. On the one hand, during its production as labor power, it produces the conditions for its own necessity, that is to say, the conditions of production for profit. And on the other, its general development is to sink the value of the standard of wages over time. Marx said it himself, to be a productive laborer is a misfortune. He didn't extol the virtues of labor. On the contrary, Das Kapital, labor theory, is a critique of labor itself under capital. The conditions for labor are the same conditions that impose the law of value onto the other class. We are the material substrate that make possible the other class, and our impoverishment is capital's gains. Our working longer than necessary to reproduce labor is the unpaid labor time that grows exponentially. To fully address poverty, this labor must be spread out, and those cut off entirely from the stream of value must be initially reincorporated by reducing the laboring day to no more than what is socially necessary for society as a whole. We cannot address poverty any other way. This holds true in the first world as it does in the third. Point 2. Government has never solved a single social problem. Not one, ever. Like Reagan once famously said, government is the problem. There is a reason there's a growing secular trend of government mistrust to the point of total nihilism in institutions. Even as recently as when Johnson declared his war on poverty, the government has failed because it sees employment, labor, as the means to escape poverty. Even so, these policies have made us only poorer. They have failed to solve every problem which they have declared they could: the war on drugs, the war on terror, the housing crisis, the corrupt banking systems, crime, racism, sexism, our education system, healthcare, taking care of our elderly population, immigration, and the list goes on. Government's sole purpose, especially in the United States, is to solve the problems of capital. If they happen to coincide with the needs of humans, it is entirely unintentional. Capital's needs, the need to produce surplus value, are raised above the needs of humans. For this reason, the government cannot be looked upon to solve the needs of the people. Instead, we should focus on demonstrating how the lives and needs of people can be met despite government, how the material conditions of each and every single human would benefit with less government, less spending, less taxes, until they finally realize that even a small government is unnecessary. Here I want to pause to remind people of one thing. The Marxist-Leninists and almost every other variant of Marxists still insist that we need some proletariat state that eradicates the bourgeois state. But my contention is that after 90 years of fascist state management, this step is no longer necessary. The fascists who rule in Washington, D.C. and abroad have already made the bourgeois state immediately abolishable. There is no lengthy duration of proletariat rule required at this very moment. All that's left to do is to confront the state, eradicate all spending, and wind down the mode of production's management by the fascist state. This is antithetical to what most post-war Marxists understand about the state. But to not acknowledge this management itself as an advancement in the mode of production is to misunderstand that this development has been generative of more potential for free time and a truncated path to communism thanks to fascism. Proletarians didn't have to win the state in order for its nullification. The fascists have done a perfectly fine job of doing that for us. Point 3. Money is a weapon the government uses to wage class warfare against the working people in this country. It is called inflation, but it is class warfare, and the Federal Reserve is our enemy's general staff. This one is rather self-explanatory, I feel, and connects to the previous point. Money is not for us. We don't want it and have no real use for it in its redistribution. Valueless fiat exists for the sole purpose of extending the shelf life of capitalism by selling labor power far below its value in perpetuity. What can be said about money, or the dollar, is that it could be used as a weapon so long as we understand its significance on the world market, i.e. as the main source of liquidity and credit, rather than merely use it to extract excess capital and surplus value from other nations, as Washington, D.C. does now. We could use it to bankrupt other nations entirely. We can reverse money as class warfare and turn it back upon the very state which wields it in order to slowly starve us through inflation. In short, it can be used to starve capital throughout the world through its antithesis, deflation. Point 4. Government is the sole threat to democracy. Fascism is not a threat coming from the people. The government itself is fascist. We must break this trend of calling other people within the working class fascists. Only the state is fascist, just as only the state could be Nazis. Our freedoms are not being abridged by individual people who share different views or cultural norms or values, but by the government which has sole control over codification or validation of these norms. They are the true bulwark from each according to his ability to each according to his needs, because they are the hostile agent preventing the necessary unleashing of free time that is necessary to realize that aim for each individual. They are not just hostile to people living their own lives, they are hostile to people having enough free time to figure out what that even truly means as a possibility. Point 5. The enemy of the proletarians is not the bourgeoisie. The enemy is the state. In conjunction with point 4, we must reiterate that we are not at war with other proletarians, nor are we even at war with the bourgeoisie. We are at war with the state itself now. Marx said the expropriators would be expropriated, but he never said who would do this. As it stands, I think it is evident that the state are the expropriators and the bourgeoisie and the working class are the expropriated. It is contrary to what most communists understand, as they wish to blame this or that problem on this or that capitalist or billionaire or rentier. But these categories are already historically superfluous to production itself, just as the direct expenditure of labor time is superfluous to production. This is quite helpful to know because it means we can stop with the pretenses each Marxist or communist organization has and merge them all into one body whose enemy is formally the state. They are the ones managing capital and even exploiting the capitalist class, something no one wants to hear as we think of only the capitalist class as being functionally exploitative. But ever since FDR and the Great Depression, they have slowly ceased to have any real function in society other than to collect on the interest on their otherwise worthless capital. The largest proponent of class warfare is done through the state, not at the office or the workplace, but in Washington, D.C. In conclusion, we have a lot to unlearn still, and even further to go to unifying the existing communist organizations. We can't get to that point if we don't agree on the premises above. Communists in the United States cannot alter these realities any more than they can alter the laws governing capitalism. All we can hope to do is hasten the demise of capitalism based on these laws, and more impactfully as a homogeneous force with one aim and one aim only, the abolition of the state.